January 1945. A bitter wind cuts across the POW camp in northern France. Frost clings to the wooden barracks, and the low murmur of German women soldiers drifts through the cold air. Their breath forms small clouds as they shuffle along frozen paths, uniforms stiff with cold, eyes heavy from months of rations and monotony. Then, a clatter, a low hum of wheels on snow-packed ground. The women pause, heads tilting. American guards roll massive crates toward the mess hall, the metallic scent of ice and sugar wafting faintly in the frigid air. Whispers ripple through the rows of prisoners. What is that? Is it food? As the first crate opens, the women's eyes widen. Inside, neat rows of ice cream tubs, untouched by the austerity that had defined every meal for months. The cold, creamy promise gleams under the dim winter sunlight. Astonishment is instantaneous. Some laugh, some stare in disbelief, others reach out tentatively. No one had expected such abundance, such indulgence. Even the harshest skeptics among them cannot suppress their wonder. For a moment, the camp is silent, suspended between disbelief and delight. Then, tiny murmurs swell into astonished chatter, the taste of liberation hidden inside a simple frozen treat. Context, background. Section 1. By late 1944, the European theater of World War II had entered a phase defined by exhaustion, scarcity, and the slow encroachment of Allied forces into German-occupied territories. POW camps, scattered across liberated regions and Allied-controlled zones, were home to thousands of captured enemy personnel. Among them were German women who had served in auxiliary roles, medical units, and support positions, often civilians pressed into service as the Reich mobilized every available resource. Their capture brought abrupt disruption. Barracks, once organized for operational efficiency, now confined those who had been soldiers, nurses, and assistants in unfamiliar routines of surrender and dependence. Camp life was austere, food was rationed, often cold or insufficient, measured precisely to maintain basic health but never comfort. Barracks were drafty wooden structures or repurposed warehouses, their floors creaking under the weight of winter frost. Heat was minimal, water rationed, and daily routines dictated by the schedules of Allied officers managing security, discipline, and humanitarian needs simultaneously. Letters from home were scarce, morale fluctuating, and long hours were punctuated by labor, inspections, and the quiet routines of survival. For the German women, the psychological toll was as significant as the physical. Propaganda of the prior years had portrayed the Allies in extremes, merciless, alien, and often inhuman. Yet in captivity, they encountered officers whose role was to maintain order and prevent unrest, blending authority with restraint. While guards monitored behavior and maintained strict schedules, they also implemented small acts designed to preserve health and prevent rebellion. Nutrition, hygiene, and periodic entertainment, carefully rationed, became tools of management, subtly shaping prisoner compliance. The camps were a microcosm of wartime Europe, discipline layered over deprivation, structure imposed over scarcity. Supplies were limited, yet the Allies understood that human resilience required more than mere sustenance. Even minor luxuries, a fresh blanket, a book, or the rare treat, carried disproportionate weight in morale and obedience. For women accustomed to regimented diets and austere field conditions, any divergence from monotony sparked curiosity and eventually astonishment. Food logistics in POW camps were complex undertakings. Allied supply lines, strained by ongoing operations across multiple fronts, prioritized essentials first. Rations followed carefully calculated formulas, designed to prevent malnutrition while preserving the finite resources of a global war effort. Yet surplus, seasonal goods, and occasional indulgences could be integrated without threatening operational needs. Ice cream, frozen and delicately packaged, was rare but possible. Its presence in a camp, amidst a winter of rationed staples, was extraordinary, a tactile symbol of abundance in a world defined by scarcity. The anticipation of such treats carried its own power. In whispered rumors among prisoners, tales of ice cream shipments circulated before any actual crates arrived. For women confined for months, every hint of novelty drew attention, imagination, and hope. Even before tasting the first scoop, the mind envisioned textures, flavors, and colors unknown to their recent experience, a mental escape from the monotony of bread, potatoes, and powdered meals. Moreover, the cultural contrast was stark. In Germany, civilian food rationing had been severe, and luxuries were scarce. Sweet treats, frozen goods, and indulgences were largely the preserve of the privileged or the propagandistically fortunate. To witness, within the neutral authority of a POW camp, mountains of ice cream, organized, chilled, abundant, was a lesson in abundance as much as it was in astonishment. It created cognitive dissonance. The enemy, long vilified, was capable of generosity, organization, and provision beyond expectation. For the German women, this combination of scarcity, anticipation, and sudden abundance created fertile ground for astonishment. The crates of ice cream were not merely dessert. They were a physical manifestation of the unexpected, a sensory shock to minds attuned to austerity. In that moment, the regimented reality of camp life, cold floors, rationed meals, and strict schedules clashed with the surreal promise of indulgence, producing a mix of disbelief, delight, and tentative curiosity. The stage was set. Months of confinement, deprivation, and rigid discipline had primed the senses and the psyche alike. When the ice cream arrived, the astonishment was instantaneous, widespread, and deeply human, a testament to the enduring power of surprise and small luxuries, even amid the broader horrors of war. Context, background. Section 2. The logistical feat of delivering ice cream to a POW camp in the dead of winter was no small task. Frozen goods required specialized transport and careful storage, a remarkable achievement amid the scarcity and operational pressures of late 1944. Allied officers and quartermasters coordinated shipments, ensuring that the precious commodity reached its destination without melting or spoiling. Each crate represented hours of planning, the careful balancing of priorities, and a recognition that morale was as strategically significant as rations or medical supplies. For the German women, the moment the crates arrived crystallized the contrast between expectation and reality. Their daily diet had been predictable and austere: bread, thin soups, powdered milk, and the occasional piece of fruit. Ice cream was an alien indulgence, both in taste and in quantity. Rows of tubs, neatly arranged and cold to the touch, challenged their understanding of what was possible in captivity. The sheer volume provoked astonishment. Even seasoned soldiers accustomed to discipline and deprivation found themselves momentarily unmoored by the surreal abundance. The psychological effects of such indulgences were immediate. Officers observed a marked shift in behavior. Laughter returned to the barracks. Whispered conversations became animated, and even the quietest prisoners displayed visible excitement. In this environment, astonishment was not mere whimsy. It functioned as a subtle form of liberation, an emotional release from months of monotony and constraint. The ice cream became a focal point, a symbol of abundance and attention, bridging the gap between captor and captive with an unexpected human touch. Cultural contrasts heightened the impact. In wartime Germany, civilians and soldiers alike had been conditioned to scarcity, ration cards, and strict oversight of indulgences. The women were trained to endure, to suppress desire, and to prioritize duty over pleasure. In the camp, they were confronted with a scene that defied these cultural norms: freedom to enjoy, access to abundance, and the tacit permission to indulge without consequence. It was not only a physical experience, but an intellectual and emotional revelation. The arrival of ice cream also carried subtle political and moral undertones. Allied authorities understood that humane treatment of POWs could serve multiple purposes: compliance, international reputation, and the reinforcement of a moral high ground. Offering treats like ice cream was a deliberate, calculated decision, demonstrating that victory need not be accompanied by cruelty. For the prisoners, astonishment was intertwined with ethical reflection. The same individuals who had been conditioned to expect brutality were confronted with generosity and thoughtful provision. Moreover, the novelty of the treat created opportunities for social bonding within the camp. Women clustered in small groups, comparing flavors, whispering about quantities, and sharing in the astonishment. This collective experience fostered a fragile but real sense of community, a temporary reprieve from the isolation, hierarchy, and routine of confinement. Shared astonishment became a social glue, strengthening ties and providing a framework for dialogue, laughter, and subtle resistance to the mental strain of captivity. The event also highlighted the role of sensory experience in shaping memory and perception. Taste, sight, and touch, creamy texture, cold bite, vivid sweetness, contrasted sharply with prior deprivation. These sensations etched themselves into memory with remarkable clarity, ensuring that the astonishment would be recalled long after the camp gates were left behind. Diaries, post-war interviews, and memoirs would later reference these moments not for strategic importance, but for their profound emotional and cultural resonance. In essence, the arrival of ice cream transformed a simple act of provisioning into a complex interplay of logistics, psychology, culture, and morality. For the German women POWs, astonishment was the inevitable response, a mixture of disbelief, delight, and reflection, shaped by months of deprivation and the stark contrast of sudden abundance. The stage was fully set for the human angles, the emotional reactions, and the collective astonishment that would define this extraordinary episode in camp life. Angles, Section 1. For the German women, astonishment was immediate and visceral. Faces frozen from months of austerity lit up with wide-eyed surprise. Some laughed quietly, suppressing incredulity. Others touched the cold tubs with tentative fingers, as if confirming that the frozen treat was real and not a cruel illusion. The simple act of receiving ice cream disrupted the monotony of camp life, transforming ordinary barracks into a temporary space of wonder. Whispered conversations flourished, punctuated by laughter, gasps, and repeated expressions of disbelief. In these moments, the human need for sensory pleasure, for a break from deprivation, asserted itself above duty or caution. Astonishment became a shared experience, creating bonds between prisoners who had endured isolation and scarcity together. Allied officers understood the psychological and strategic value of small luxuries. Ice cream was more than a treat. It was a tool to maintain morale, encourage compliance, and subtly convey authority. By offering indulgence, officers demonstrated benevolence and humane management, reinforcing the notion that captivity did not equate to cruelty. This careful balance of discipline and generosity minimized unrest while fostering a controlled environment where prisoners could experience joy without threatening camp order. Even high-ranking commanders monitored reactions, noting how astonishment translated into improved behavior and cohesion among the prisoners. The contrast between German austerity and American abundance magnified the astonishment. In Germany, wartime rationing had been strict, and luxuries like ice cream were nearly unattainable. The German women were conditioned to expect minimal indulgence, yet here, Within the walls of a POW camp, abundance appeared in the most tangible form. The sight and taste of ice cream challenged pre-existing cultural assumptions, provoking both delight and incredulity. Astonishment was intensified by this cultural dissonance. The enemy, long portrayed as formidable and threatening, could also provide pleasure and indulgence. Beyond physical delight, the act of serving ice cream carried moral weight. The German women, trained to view Allied forces as harsh and unyielding, were confronted with kindness and thoughtfulness. The gesture prompted reflection. Generosity could exist even amid conflict, and humane treatment could coexist with military authority. Astonishment in this context included ethical consideration, a recognition that the boundaries of wartime behavior were more nuanced than propaganda had suggested. Astonishment was amplified by the sensory shock. Cold, creamy ice cream, a flavor and texture largely absent from recent memory, offered a stark contrast to rations of bread, potatoes, and thin soups. The tactile experience, combined with visual abundance and subtle aromas, created a multi-sensory impact. Each spoonful reinforced disbelief and delight, etching the moment into memory with enduring clarity. Sensory astonishment became inseparable from emotional astonishment, blending surprise, pleasure, and curiosity into a singular human response. Angles, Section 2. Delivering ice cream to a POW camp in the midst of winter required precision and coordination. Freezers, insulated transport, and careful timing ensured that the frozen treat reached its destination intact. Allied supply chains were stretched thin, yet officers prioritized the shipment, recognizing its psychological impact. Ice cream was not simply dessert. It was a demonstration of technological capability, organization, and control over resources. For the German women, the very existence of such logistics, refrigeration, storage, and careful transport, was astonishing. It showcased a level of planning and abundance that contrasted sharply with their recent experiences of scarcity, reinforcing both disbelief and admiration for the efficiency of their captors. From the viewpoint of camp authorities and Allied officers, the astonishment of the prisoners was a calculated benefit. Observing the women's reactions allowed officers to gauge morale, compliance, and the psychological state of the camp population. Astonishment became a measure of success. Laughter, wide eyes, whispered exclamations, each signaled that prisoners were engaged, attentive, and emotionally affected. The enemy's astonishment was not only entertaining, but strategically valuable, subtly reinforcing the power of generosity as a tool of management. Ice cream did more than delight individual prisoners. It fostered a shared social experience. Women clustered in small groups, whispering, comparing flavors, and laughing together. Astonishment created temporary solidarity, a communal pause from the isolation and hierarchy of camp life. The shared reactions became a social glue, strengthening interpersonal bonds. In a setting defined by strict routines and enforced conformity, astonishment catalyzed a brief but meaningful reprieve, allowing prisoners to reclaim a fragment of autonomy through collective delight. For historians and cultural observers, the scene represents a striking intersection of scarcity, morality, and human psychology. Astonishment at the sight of ice cream underscores the broader wartime contrasts between deprivation and abundance, between expectation and reality. German women, trained to endure austerity and hardship, were confronted with a tangible symbol of the Allies' logistical and moral capacity. The moment crystallizes the nuances of POW life, that human beings, even in captivity, respond with wonder and joy when presented with the unexpected, and that small indulgences can resonate far beyond their immediate material value. Finally, astonishment left a lasting imprint on memory. Diaries, letters, and post-war testimonies often reference such moments not for strategic importance, but for their emotional weight. The combination of surprise, delight, and cultural contrast ensured that the experience of ice cream became emblematic of a larger narrative, that even in captivity, moments of joy, astonishment, and human generosity could persist. These experiences became touchstones for recollection, reinforcing the human capacity to find wonder even amid the austerity and trauma of war. Climax, Turning Point, Section 1. The moment the first crate of ice cream was rolled into the mess hall, the camp seemed to pause. German women soldiers froze mid-step, their eyes drawn to the rows of neatly stacked tubs, glinting under the pale winter sunlight, filtering through frost-streaked windows. For months, their daily existence had been defined by rationed meals, monotonous routines, and a persistent cold that seeped through thin uniforms and wooden floors. Now, in the midst of that austerity, the sight of frozen cream, sugar, and flavors beyond imagination was almost unreal. A hush settled over the room, punctuated by whispered questions. "Is this really for us?" One woman's hand trembled as she reached toward a tub, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. Another pressed her palm to her chest, struggling to contain disbelief and excitement. Even the camp guards, observing from the edges, could not suppress faint smiles. The astonishment was palpable, shared silently across rows of prisoners, connecting individuals who had endured isolation and deprivation together. As the women cautiously began to open the tubs, the first spoonfuls elicited audible gasps, creamy, cold, and sweet. The taste was entirely unlike the coarse, bland rations that had defined months of captivity. Some laughed outright, others stared in wide-eyed astonishment, as if the ice cream itself had suspended reality. Conversation sparked, tentative at first, then growing in warmth, as prisoners compared flavors, debated which variety was the richest, and shared in collective delight. The psychological shift was immediate. Months of austerity had enforced rigid routines, but astonishment broke the monotony. Guards observed a subtle transformation. Posture straightened, eyes brightened, and suppressed laughter became audible. For a fleeting moment, the barracks were transformed from a place of confinement to a space of shared human experience. The ice cream was not merely dessert, it was an emotional catalyst, unlocking joy and surprise that had lain dormant under the weight of captivity. Even the most hardened prisoners could not mask their reactions. One woman, accustomed to discipline and control, wiped a tear from her eye as she tasted the cold sweetness. Another whispered to her neighbor, laughter mingling with astonished disbelief. "Even our generals would envy this." The phrase, half jest, half exclamation, circulated quickly, embodying both incredulity and delight. Astonishment became a language of its own, a silent acknowledgement that human joy could exist even under the strictest constraints. The arrival of ice cream also emphasized the contrast between expectation and reality. German women, conditioned to anticipate deprivation and stern authority, now encountered abundance delivered with order, care, and attention. The astonishment was not only sensory but cognitive, a collision between lived experience and what was suddenly possible. For the prisoners, the moment blurred the lines between captivity and indulgence, authority and generosity, creating a profound psychological ripple that extended far beyond the mess hall walls. Guards and officers watched attentively, noting the broader implications. Astonishment, it seemed, had reinforced both morale and compliance. The women were engaged, cooperative, and visibly affected. A testament to the psychological efficacy of small, well-planned gestures. Each expression of wonder, each whispered exclamation reinforced the understanding that even minor acts of abundance could transform the dynamics of a camp defined by austerity. By the end of the first distribution, astonishment had evolved into collective delight. Small clusters formed around the remaining crates, sharing spoonfuls and laughter. For a moment, the distinctions between prisoner and guard, between fear and familiarity, softened. The human response to abundance, surprise, joy, and gratitude, had asserted itself over months of deprivation and discipline. Astonishment had reached its peak, yet what followed would prove even more transformative, as the memory of that day began to reshape the rhythms of camp life in quiet but lasting ways. Climax, Turning Point. Section 2. As the distribution continued, astonishment deepened into a shared, almost contagious energy. Rows of German women, once muted and subdued, now buzzed with laughter and conversation. The initial disbelief gave way to playful comparisons. "This one is sweeter. Try this flavor, it's unbelievable." And clusters of prisoners huddled together, passing tubs and sharing spoonfuls. The hall, once cold and austere, now vibrated with a warmth that came not from heat, but from human connection and the sudden liberation of small indulgences. The reactions were diverse, yet equally profound. One nurse, a woman of measured demeanor, allowed herself a quiet smile as she tasted the ice cream, whispering softly to herself, "I've never imagined anything like this." Another, younger and more exuberant, laughed outright, raising a spoon in mock triumph. Even those accustomed to rigid discipline were swept into the wave of astonishment, their stoic exteriors melting under the unexpected pleasure. It was a rare collision of sensory delight and emotional freedom, the first genuine moment of levity in months, perhaps years. Officers observed closely, noting not only the astonishment, but its ripple effect on morale and behavior. Astonishment had become a tool. It fostered cooperation, distracted from minor grievances, and reinforced the perception of humane treatment. Prisoners engaged with each other, with the environment, and subtly with the authorities, all under the unspoken acknowledgement that generosity and abundance could coexist with captivity. The ice cream had created a bridge connecting human need, psychological insight, and logistical prowess in one simple, frozen gesture. Beyond the hall, the astonishment had social implications. Small communities formed around shared tubs, and conversations that had been whispered in corners now flowed openly. For a moment, hierarchy and rank softened. Prisoners found common ground in astonishment, laughter, and the delight of novelty. The ice cream became a cultural equalizer, momentarily leveling the rigid structures imposed by camp life. Astonishment, in this sense, was not passive. It actively reshaped social dynamics, creating bonds where distance and authority had previously defined interactions. The sensory experience amplified the emotional impact. Cold, creamy textures, sweet flavors, and the tactile contrast with the harsh winter barracks made each spoonful a revelation. Astonishment was reinforced with every taste, surprise at sweetness, joy at the abundance, and gratitude at the care with which it had been delivered. The human mind, conditioned for deprivation, struggled to reconcile the reality of indulgence with the expectation of austerity. Each bite was a small, tangible victory over months of monotony. One particularly vivid moment captured the essence of this climax. A group of prisoners gathered around a crate, their hands reaching tentatively, then confidently for tubs. Laughter and astonishment intertwined, whispered exclamations turned into shared cheers. Even the guards allowed themselves quiet smiles, recognizing the power of the gesture to uplift, calm, and humanize. In that instant, the camp ceased to be merely a place of confinement. It became a space where astonishment, delight, and human connection could flourish, however briefly. By the end of the distribution, astonishment had transformed into collective memory. The ice cream was gone, but the reactions remained. Wide eyes, lingering smiles, shared stories, and whispered recollections that would echo long after the cold tubs had been emptied. The climax was complete. The intersection of deprivation, abundance, and human psychology had reached its peak, leaving an indelible mark on every prisoner who had witnessed it. Astonishment had become experience, and experience had become memory, shaping both the present and the future understanding of life within the camp. Aftermath. Section 1. The weeks following the ice cream distribution were marked by subtle but unmistakable changes in the camp. German women POWs moved with a slightly lighter step, their interactions tinged with a lingering sense of shared delight. Astonishment, once confined to the initial moment of revelation, had evolved into a durable morale boost. Officers observed improved cooperation, a decrease in minor disputes, and a more engaged atmosphere during daily routines. Small indulgences, it seemed, could have outsized influence in the rigidly structured life of a POW camp. For the prisoners themselves, the experience became a reference point. Conversations often returned to the day of the ice cream, which flavor was best, how cold and creamy it had been, the shock of abundance in a world defined by scarcity. Astonishment was no longer a fleeting emotion. It had transformed into collective memory, shaping social bonds and daily expectations. Even months later, the mention of ice cream could prompt smiles, laughter, or quiet reflection, reinforcing the psychological impact of the event. The camp authorities recognized the broader significance. Beyond immediate morale, acts of controlled generosity communicated a moral and political message. Humane treatment could coexist with military authority. Astonishment served as both reward and reinforcement, demonstrating that captivity did not necessitate cruelty. These moments of indulgence were carefully measured, ensuring that the psychological benefits did not undermine discipline or operational efficiency. The balance was delicate, yet the results were clear. On a practical level, the distribution highlighted logistical and technological capability. Freezers, insulated transport, and careful timing ensured that perishable goods could reach remote locations even in winter. For the women, astonishment was intertwined with admiration, a recognition that the Allies' organizational skills could deliver what seemed impossible. Beyond taste, the experience emphasized efficiency, planning, and control, all wrapped in a gesture of human generosity. Socially, the ice cream fostered cohesion. Women clustered in small groups, sharing tubs and conversation. This astonishment created community, temporarily transcended the hierarchical structures of camp life. Rank, age, and background mattered less when astonishment was universal. The shared delight created a network of human connection, an emotional relief from months of monotony and deprivation. Astonishment, in this sense, became both an individual and collective experience, simultaneously uplifting and bonding. Yet astonishment also carried reflection. Many prisoners contemplated the contrast between expectation and reality, scarcity and abundance, austerity and indulgence. The act of receiving ice cream prompted awareness that the world outside the camp, and the people administering it, was more nuanced than wartime propaganda had suggested. Even within captivity, generosity existed, leaving a lasting impression on perceptions of the enemy. The emotional resonance of astonishment extended beyond taste. It shaped understanding, empathy, and memory. The first weeks after the event also revealed the power of anticipation. Subsequent small treats, whether fruit, baked goods, or occasional rations beyond the norm, were eagerly awaited, with astonishment primed by prior experience. The memory of ice cream had set a psychological benchmark, demonstrating that even minor indulgences could elicit profound human response. Officers noted that controlled generosity could maintain morale, reduce tension, and foster compliance, a testament to the strategic value of astonishment in the POW environment. In every sense, the aftermath of the ice cream distribution reshaped the rhythm of daily life. Astonishment became an enduring motif, influencing behavior, interactions, and perceptions. The women's reactions were recorded in diaries and post-war recollections, remembered not for military significance, but for their emotional impact. Through a simple frozen treat, a moment of disbelief and delight had transformed both prisoners and observers, leaving an indelible mark on camp history. Aftermath. Section 2. As the weeks progressed, the astonishment sparked by the ice cream began to influence broader camp dynamics. Small routines that had once felt monotonous, morning roll calls, chores, and meal distributions, were subtly colored by the memory of indulgence. Prisoners moved with a slightly lighter step, sharing small smiles and whispered jokes about flavors and quantities. Astonishment had transitioned from a single event into a sustained uplift, creating pockets of emotional reprieve amid the rigid schedules and austere conditions. Officers noted the psychological benefits with interest. Compliance improved, tensions eased, and the women were more attentive during briefings and labor assignments. Astonishment had reinforced a fundamental lesson of human behavior. Small, well-timed gestures could have disproportionate influence on morale. By providing ice cream, the Allies had created a moment of shared joy that strengthened social cohesion and encouraged engagement, demonstrating that kindness and strategy could coexist within the constraints of captivity. The memory of ice cream became a recurring topic among the prisoners, woven into daily conversation and quietly shaping expectations. Even in later distributions of standard rations, comparisons were made. "It's not as good as that day," or "Remember how sweet it was." Astonishment, initially spontaneous, had evolved into a benchmark for morale, a reference against which all subsequent events were measured. The POW's shared recollection reinforced social bonds, creating a network of connection that persisted despite confinement. Cultural reflection accompanied the astonishment. German women, accustomed to scarcity, found themselves confronting abundance and generosity delivered by the very forces they had been trained to fear. This contrast provoked not only delight but cognitive dissonance, challenging preconceptions about enemy behavior, fairness, and morality. The event highlighted the human capacity for kindness even amidst war, leaving an impression that extended beyond immediate pleasure into personal and cultural reflection. The practical and logistical achievement also became part of the prisoners' astonishment. Maintaining frozen goods in a camp far from supply centers required planning, foresight, and technical skill. The ice cream was a tangible proof of the Allies' organizational prowess, an unspoken demonstration that even in wartime scarcity, resourcefulness could achieve remarkable results. Prisoners absorbed this lesson, acknowledging efficiency and capability alongside the simple joy of the treat itself. Socially, the event strengthened communal bonds. Groups of prisoners who had previously remained isolated now interacted more freely, sharing portions, offering recommendations, and laughing together. Astonishment had created a brief egalitarian space where age, rank, and prior status mattered less than the collective experience of delight. In this way, a simple act of indulgence reshaped social patterns, turning the camp into a microcosm of shared humanity, however temporary or fragile. The long-term impact was equally significant. Diaries, letters, and post-war accounts frequently mention the ice cream distribution, not for its strategic importance, but for its enduring emotional imprint. Astonishment, once a fleeting reaction, became memory, shaping narratives of life in captivity. It highlighted the power of small acts to influence human emotion, social interaction, and perception. a lesson as relevant for history as it was for the immediate circumstances of the POWs. Even months later, references to ice cream could prompt laughter, astonishment, or quiet reflection, illustrating the lasting effect of a simple pleasure in extraordinary conditions. The aftermath demonstrated that astonishment was not a transient state, but a transformative experience, capable of altering behavior, strengthening bonds, and leaving an indelible mark on memory. In the austere world of POW life, the ice cream distribution had created a rare moment of abundance, joy, and shared humanity, remembered long after the cold tubs had been emptied. Reflection, closure. The astonishment of German women POWs at the sight of mountains of ice cream offers more than a whimsical anecdote. It reveals the profound human capacity to respond to generosity, abundance, and unexpected kindness, even in the harshest circumstances. For months, these women had endured deprivation, rigid routines, and the psychological weight of captivity. Then, in a single moment, the extraordinary appeared, cold, creamy, sweet, and abundant, a tangible reminder that life could still offer delight. This episode underscores the interplay between logistics, psychology, and morality in wartime. The Allies' careful planning, technical execution, and attention to morale transformed a simple dessert into a powerful instrument of human engagement. Astonishment was not merely an emotional reaction, it became a tool for cohesion, compliance, and subtle diplomacy. The gesture demonstrated that acts of kindness, even small ones, can bridge divides created by ideology, propaganda, and conflict. On a human level, the moment captures the universality of emotion. The laughter, wide-eyed wonder, and whispered exclamations transcended rank, nationality, and circumstance. Astonishment reminded both prisoners and observers of a simple truth. Joy, surprise, and shared pleasure are fundamental aspects of the human experience. In a world dominated by scarcity and conflict, ice cream became a fleeting but profound symbol of hope, generosity, and the persistence of human dignity. Historically, the event serves as a lens through which to understand the nuances of POW life. Beyond rations, rules, and reports, the memories of astonishment, delight, and connection reveal the emotional landscape of captivity. These experiences, recorded in diaries and memoirs, offer insight into how seemingly minor acts can leave lasting impressions, shaping personal narratives and collective memory. Ultimately, the astonishment of the German women POWs reminds us that even in wartime, moments of humanity persist. Ice cream, cold and sweet, became more than a treat. It became a testament to resilience, compassion, and the enduring capacity for wonder. In the memory of those who experienced it, astonishment transformed both captivity and expectation, leaving a quiet but unforgettable mark on history.